Yes, you're gonna have people turn their backs, but it's time for us to keep it real. Just keep talking that real, bro. Do what you do. I know what you do, so keep doing that. Talk the real.
The HBI lads will see you now. See you now. See you now.
I don't want to cause no problems. I just want to live my life, but I keep on hearing about nonsense.
And we're back. HBI Podcast, Health, Business, and in Between. And by some miracle, though you may not know it, depending on what order these podcasts come out, everyone is here. Believe the hype. Oh, what a time. What a time to be alive. And I feel like the reason everyone's here is because today's topic is all about gym bros. And I'm not talking about the glorious Australian NFT project. I am talking about people trying to create some ideal of biomechanics or like training principles based on ideology that is fundamentally flawed. Now, I know the big man who's in my top corner here, Mr. Ben Humphries, is ready to rage. So, Ben, do you want to lead in on this one?
Let's go. All right. We are back. We're all good. Crypto's steady, which means that everyone's mood's a bit better. Mina just had to attend to a patella dislocation on the work site. So he's just made it. So this one will be short and sharp, but something that, you know, we all see quite commonly, especially if you're working with lots of coaches and PTs, and also working with certain clientele, especially, I guess I like to call them the gym girls. So gym bros, but just in a girl form, and often just as obnoxious and gym bro science strong as, and carry their gym bro Bibles around. And they, as Nate said, a lot of the programming, I believe that these guys do, they got to be, when they do their competitions, for example, there are certain things that judges look for. Now that usually will dictate programming for people. However, it doesn't take into consideration injury history, individual biomechanics, anatomical variations, and potentially, training age and whatnot, other training principles. Anyway, the big thing at the moment that's on my mind is more to do shoulder, upper back, neck, scapula. In particular, this one's for those girls who really avoid training any scapular elevation work to upper trap, levator scap, because they're scared that they'll get too bulky through the upper trap, and that the upper trap and levator scap is already, bulky. But where I guess my perspective on this is that it's actually, reverse engineering. You're like, all right, well, why is a muscle hypertonic to begin with? Because it's probably overloaded, it's stressed, it might be inflamed. Now, if it is in a chronic hypertonic, I guess, pathological state, then you got to really work out, right, what input or lack of input is causing this problem to continue. Now, if we program, for example, that someone, say a gym girl comes in and she's got a competition coming up, and she is, saying that her upper trap and her levator scap is kicking in on every exercises do, maybe deltoid work, lateral dumbbell raises, pressing, back day, whatever it may be. Now, you can look at that face value and go, well, should we, detrain that? Should we avoid that? Like short-term thinking is literally just avoid that problem. All right, let's just not train it. Now, in my opinion, people, by not training scap elevation, means it leads to some scap instability, overload through the cervical thoracic spine, several shoulder girdle problems, and over time can lead to, chronic neck issues, headaches, stiffness. You're all with me at the moment. We all see it. Okay. Anyway, so I'm like, well, if we look at why it's happening in the first place, then we can understand why it is what it is and why it's manifesting itself as this. Now, if like any muscle, right? If you damage a muscle, the idea is to rehabilitate it, get stronger. You get some associated hypertrophy with that. You get CNS and PNS nervous system changes and adaptations. You get obviously the muscle tissue, neural tissue changes. Anyway, so if, for example, in this example specifically, if a girl comes in or a guy and all they're getting is, trap tightness and that sort of thing, upper trap, levator scap, often I'll ask, all right, well, when was the last time you had scap elevation programming in your programs? It's like, well, I never train upper traps and levator scap. It's already too bulky. I'm like, well, why is it too bulky? In my opinion, pathologically hypertonic because of, being overloaded chronically. So I'm like, well, to reverse engineer this and actually get the muscle to not appear as bulky, because it's not bulky because you got plenty of muscle tissue there. It's actually bulky because it's hypertonic and it's stressed and it's inflamed. So therefore, if you train it in a way that is a more of a stability focus and a biomechanical focus versus a strength and hypertrophy focus, which will come hand in hand anyway, you're not going to actually enhance the size of the muscle. You should actually load it in a way that's appropriate, where it will become, it can handle load better, has a better capacity to handle load, and therefore it shouldn't be kicking off and being hypertonic and spasmodic as much as it has been. Obviously, there's other factors to consider: cervical spine, thoracic spinal health, scapular stability, glenohumeral stability. But it's, in my opinion, in these cases, it's actually, the polar opposite of what people do. People will choose to detrain it. It enters this ugly cycle, continues, change the behavior, change the outcome, begin training it, twice a week, low volume, and you're not going to get these massive traps that people think they're going to get by training some shrugs or upright rows or whatever it may be. Anyway, long story short, girls, train the traps. Upper trap, train the levator scabs. It's going to give you better neck health, better fucking thoracic health, and better shoulder health. All right, on to you, Dan.
Yeah, I think a few good points there. Another thing that's a predisposing underlying factor is obviously like breathing, respiratory mechanics. Everyone's stressed. If you're not breathing properly, obviously you're going to be using a lot of, bucket handle, pump handle motion, accessory breathing patterns, and one of the biggest muscles there is going to be upper traps. So I'd say if you're not addressing respiratory dysfunctions and teach people how to breathe and brace properly, that's the first thing that's going to contribute to hypertonicity and sensitivity around that area. But I agree with what you said in terms of there's nothing wrong with training it, but when it comes to training principles and programming principles, looking at things like frequency, intensity, volume, we can train a certain muscle or a certain area effectively. We don't necessarily need to hypertrophy it or make it super strong. It's there's two different camps. You got strength and hypertrophy, then you got corrective exercise, stability, motor control, doing some motor control work, stability work via corrective exercises at low intensity. It's like a low absolute intensity. It might feel hard, but relative intensity versus absolute intensity in that situation will allow you to have enough enough of an intervention to get the outcome we want, which is going to be good range of motion, good mobility, good stability, without having too much volume or intensity that we're going to start to get big, bulky traps. And obviously from a physique point of view, start to, have a detrimental effect from what they need in competition. So that's two things. And then I think the last thing, which a lot of girls have, I find just from their personal experience training females in physique, is doing things like deadlifts and Romanian deadlifts and stuff where there's a lot of grip strength, like isometrically, where you've got a lot of downward rotation and scapular depression. There's a lot of loaded isometric, eccentric volume going through the traps can be a big factor. So making smart substitutes for exercises, instead of a Romanian deadlift, doing something like a safety bar good morning, where it's we can get that same pattern, same outcome, but take a lot of that grip strength, heavy isometric, eccentric load through the traps, because that's a big factor, or using straps and not having to grip as hard. So smart substitutions can be fine, but I definitely agree with you, not just for the traps, but for any sort of dysfunction in the body, we need to have correctives, because if we don't have range of motion and a foundation of stability and range of motion, then you're not going to build muscle effectively, period.
Yeah, and on that, I always talk to clients about there's an order of priority that the body will follow, and often building muscle tissue is only done when there's enough resources to build muscle tissue. So if your body's forever trying to handle inflammation, trying to handle dysfunction, trying to repair tendon tissue, cartilage tissue, muscle tissue, whatever it may be, there's an order of priority that the body follows. And if there's enough resources left over to build muscle tissue, then that's what will happen. However, if you're training and causing these issues you're entering these chronic sort of cycles, inflammatory cycles, chronic sort of pathological cycles, then, you got to look at tissue health and its responsiveness to training, its ability to adapt. And, you might end up having poor tissue health, poor vascular supply, poor neurological supply, and you end up going backwards. So I think all things considered that you mentioned that, there's many more things to factor into this equation other than, all right, what do the judges want to see? And, what is actually appropriate for the person.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think even just taking it back a notch, right? Like you're talking more physique competitors, stuff like that, but I think it's pretty universal for a lot of the people we see in our offices. How many people come through? It's just like, oh yeah, it's because I carry all my stress through my neck. It's like, well, that's not actually a diagnosis or fundamentally a thing. It's a perception, absolutely. But usually it's because of again, lack of proprioceptive awareness. So the brain doesn't feel safe. So it's minimizing ranges of motion. It's like we said, detraining certain areas, overtrained or just underdeveloped other areas. And I think it stems across like everything, right? It's just a matter of what's the goal, where are we starting from? And fundamentally, I think there's been a lot of fear over the years around the traps, almost only secondary maybe to the low back in terms of their, the silent killers. And it's just like, if we actually work on creating good movement, good power, and good, I guess, associated mechanics, we're not going to have any issues. And in fact, it's going to work out better. And as you said, my experience with physique competitors, particularly females, is that when they do train, upward scapular rotation or scap mechanics or traps specifically, the traps actually appear leaner and give them a better shape, rather than when they are, like you said, chronically hypertonic and inflamed, you're going to get this bulking out. And I mean, if we go to a female versus male approach here, fundamentally building like bulky traps is very, in the absence of anabolics, is real hard for women, right? Like it's like, I mean,
it's like carbs,
hormonal,
not big traps, you don't.
It's just not like, again, the female body's not really fundamentally designed for it from a basic sort of hormonal mechanical point of view. Like it can happen, even in the absence of anabolics, but fuck me, it's hard. And like you're probably looking at like your elite CrossFitters maybe got more trap development than most. But they also do an absolutely proverbial shit ton of pulling in overhead, like snatch, cleans, like deadlifts, and all these things that physique crew are almost certainly not doing. And if they are, they shouldn't be. If you're just on the note, like if you're a physique competitor and you're doing snatches, why?
Well, why?
But like if you like them, sure. But other than that, why? But yeah, like if we come back to that very basic point here, like there's a lot of fear there that doesn't need to be there. And I know when I like put women on trap training, I like to use like isolated, slow tempoed shrugs just to really get women comfortable, and men as well, comfortable with like loading up through there. There's a lot of fear that comes with it, like second only to telling a physique competitor they need to up their calories. There's a lot of fear going on here. And I think just before I hand back over to the big man, Ben, like I think there's a secondary we should talk about here specifically for, I guess, bodybuilding athletes, is you'll see these people that are trying to create muscular development in these regions late stage into a cut. And you're like, well, as you said, like the body has a list of priorities, and muscle growth is calorically expensive. If you're in a 70% deficit, no fucking wonder you're not growing muscular, like, right? Like there's stuff that has to happen pre-dialing in. So like, it's just, I mean, it should be basic fundamentals. And like anyone with a basic understanding should be able to comprehend this stuff. It's like you said, there's still so much like gym knowledge where people, and like, not to take away, because gym knowledge like is important. Yeah. I'm trying to be nice about it, but like, like there is fundamental stuff that comes from experience, right? And we always talk about this experience, like at times does in certain areas trump education, but there has to be plausibility. And if it's just fundamentally like the plausibility is not there, then people really need to take a long, hard look at what they're doing, why they're doing it, and who they're listening to.
And this is a really quality conversation, and I hope most practitioners have this sort of level of communication with their clients, because this is sort of stuff that's going to myth bust a lot. For all the amount of people that we see on a daily basis, like it takes a long time to put on that sort of muscle, right? And having this education, I really hope this podcast gets to a lot of people, because we see it a lot here in the myo space as well. I want to be able to, we need to train the traps in a certain way just so we can deload the neck and the muscles and the nerves. And like, no, I don't want big shoulders. Well, it's going to take you a long time, and the sort of programming that we're doing is not going to give you big shoulders. It's going to give you a proper alignment. It's going to ease off the nerves. It's going to help you get proper functionality and ability to be able to do the things you want to do. So I think the education piece in this sector is really, really, really critical, because there's more than one way to move a muscle, and the way we're designing it from what we're talking about is not going to give you those sort of traps. So yeah, spot on, boys.
Yeah.
And complaining about muscles if you're injured and you can't actually move for long enough to put any meaningful muscles. So
you ain't going to put that on.
Baseline of function at the bottom of the pyramid is going to be a precursor to any strength hypertrophy or just living pain-free goals. So we need it doesn't have to be an either or approach. It needs to be a systematic approach of, well, let's put foundations first, and then like from there we can go more specific into hypertrophy and focusing on muscles and specifics. But there's no point focusing on specifics when we don't have general stuff down pat.
Yeah, agreed. And like it can, you might mention it's not common sense, Nathan, and nothing is against common sense or common knowledge, because what's common to you is not common to me, and what's common to another physio is not common to me. However, this is what happens when there's the level, I guess, the level of entry, the bar of entry. I don't know if I can mess that up, but the prerequisite to be a PT and then to qualify to get in, and then to be a qualified PT, for example, is low, right? And that's not dissing anyone. That's just objectively how it is. So therefore, if there's, more variables and there's less barriers to jump to getting into anything, then obviously on the outcome and the back end of things is going to be, few and far between of who's a good coach and who isn't. The ones I find who are quite good are the ones who, have, as Nate said, more experience typically, not always. And that goes for humans in general in any profession. But I think Dan touched months ago on like sport versus performance, and, sport and the outcome of sport, or a bodybuilding show, for example, is not always biomechanically, anatomically, it's not always in the best interests of the body for it to perform this way, move this way, look this way. However, for that person's certain goal, they require these certain things. So I think that, as you boys said, thorough assessment, thorough knowledge, idea of, as Dan always says, the starting point and the finish point, then you can really articulate and build something comprehensive and tailored to the individual. So it just goes back down to, great screening, great knowledge on pathoanatomics, and great knowledge on S&C principles. And this is not easy for anyone to do, to be able to dissect something so heavily, and you only can dissect and analyze something to the best of your knowledge. However, if you can educate yourself in, the allied health space and a bit of S&C space and the motivation and accountable space, and you can really sort of tailor your, I guess, coaching or your programming in a way that is, not only biomechanically advantageous, but it's also not causing certain pathologies.
Yeah, I'll finish off too. I think there's one other thing that always needs to be comprehended here, is what your role is in the team. And so big shout out. I was listening to an interview with Dr. Andy Galpin, who is an absolute legend, yesterday, and he talks about his role as a, sports scientist within performance metrics and nutrition, all these things in athlete camp. He's like, sometimes I'm running the show and sometimes I'm only there for one certain thing. And so if you've got an athlete that's under care, especially if it's someone who's more on a proactive care level, and they're going to take on this show and they've got a coach and they want you to be actively involved, then you need to know what level you are. Are you running the show with the rest of the crew, or are you just there to work body maintenance? Because if you're just there to work body maintenance, you can venture an opinion, but it's not your role to step over the top. Because Andy talks about this, like with a UFC fighter, like, of course, the striking coach, the wrestling coach, the jiu-jitsu coach, all of them believe their thing is the most important and they want the most time. So when they sit down at the start, they're like, all right, we've got 100% here, you get 5%. And if you overstep your mark, you're either getting pulled or you're getting sat down and talked to because you're not doing the right thing by the athlete. So as a practitioner, if your role is just purely like body maintenance, then it is no longer your right to do it. Now, again, you can venture it and they can choose and they may come back to you, but you have to be like, all right, listen, you asked for this from me. Yes, I believe there's a way this could be better done, but that's not why I'm here for you. If we want to go down that pathway, we can. But it's the same as like, when I'm going to go to the gym straight after this today. I'm going to go sit at Revo and O'Connor, and I'm going to leave my brain outside, because if I watched what everybody was doing, I'd have to gouge my eyes out. So sometimes you've got to recognize where your authority lies, and even if things could be done better, it's not always your right to decide that.
Yeah, and this
is
is
side note.
Yeah, very good. We'll finish it up there, but this is where we touch on collaboration, building out a network, working with people who you trust, who are getting great. They've got great competence in their field, and you don't have to be a fucking master of everything. You got to work with people who are fucking masters of everything, and that's collaborative approach, and that's how we go forward. But that's what the fucking HBI podcast is.
There's a big but on that though. Sometimes you're brought in, and there's already a team in place.
Yeah, and knowing your role, I think, is what you're saying. Like, you got a role, you play it, and if you want to do something different, then you communicate that openly with the people involved and make sure everyone's on board. At the end of the day, the client for us is the centerpiece in almost every situation. So, and
if you want to upskill their team, you have to earn the right to do it, and telling them they're wrong will not get you there.
That gets you kicked out.
Gets you fucking nothing. So that's why people are Adam Meekins on the internet yelling at people is making no impact. Anyway,
it makes a lot of
no
noise.
offense to Adam. I actually quite like the man, but like, if you're just going to blow noise, like, you're just going to get the usual circle jerkers around you. Anyway,
and get started.
It's been a pleasure this week. I enjoyed that. It was a nice little hot one. So again, as always, if you got something today, please screenshot, share it out there. Let's make sure we can help as many people as possible. And wherever you get your podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. It really, really helps to get the message out.
Well done,
we'll see you all soon.
See you
Thanks
soon.
for listening.